Hello and welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from arguably the most special place in the universe, my home, and yours, planet Earth. I'm excited to say that my sponsor for this episode is one of the most special places in the wine world. And I don't say that because I'm working here. Piscinus Ranch and Learning Center is a regenerative ranch and a global leader in regenerative grazing-based viticulture. The vineyard that I get to help take care of this year is honestly unique in the world. Designed and managed by Kelly Mulville to enable year-round grazing of sheep from its inception and to incorporate and demonstrate the incredible benefits of regenerative viticulture. And the best part is that the folks here want to share what they're learning with you. So this March 28th and 29th, the ranch is holding the first, hopefully annual regenerative viticulture immersion on site. I think this will be the start of something very special. Kelly and Rob Rutherford are the holistic educators and facilitators of the immersion and will lead us through 2 days packed with content and interaction, both indoors and in the vineyard. This will be relevant to everyone, whether you just love wine or if you're a wine grower or winemaker. We believe the power in our gatherings here are not just about the presentations, but about all the people together, connecting and participating in the learning and experiencing deeply meaningful fun. As Kelly says, the only expert in this realm is the inherent wisdom of the natural world. We are all on this journey of learning and exploring together. You can learn more and register at piscinuslearning.org. And let me spell Piscinus for you. It's Paicines, piscinuslearning.org. I hope to see you here this March 28th and 29th. Bring a bottle of some regenerative wine because I've volunteered to host a wine tasting Thursday night. And hopefully we'll also get to taste some of the wines made from the vineyard here. So hope to see you soon. This episode is the second part of the conversation I had with Nicolas Haack of Triebwerk, agroforestry consulting in Germany. In this part, Nicolas asked me to go into detail about the Vitiforestry project that I'm planning near the Finger Lakes region of New York. As part of my education and design process for this farm, I took a permaculture design certification course last year through Oregon State University and used the New York land for my design project. As we learned in last week's episode, it's probably more accurate to call this an analysis process rather than a design process because the emphasis is really on carefully learning about the land, who lives there, what kind of relationships exist prior to my involvement, how can we best enter the picture without doing harm, how can we ensure that the actions we take in the land are beneficial. Once you start asking these questions and listen and observe and research for the answers, the design will almost take care of itself. All of the elements of soil, water, wind, sun, fire, ecology, culture, social connections, climate, and history join together to guide what our stewarding of the land could look like. Our passions and intentions are important, of course, but in ecological design and permaculture design, they should respond to the land rather than force the land to respond to us. In this episode, we discuss many of the details of this vision I have for my Vitiforestry project, and how it was informed by this process of land analysis. As you'll hear, even though grapes are what inspired this project, I've come to see them as only a part of what is best for this land. I think it's an important point that I began by thinking about features, and through a lot of learning and consideration, I realized I needed to pay attention to systems and relationships. The permaculture course I took led me to these considerations and asks us to plan plant system designs rather than tree planting, for example. Relationships are at the heart of regenerative viticulture, and that's what I love about vines growing with trees. 2,000 years ago, Pliny the Elder wrote a natural history encyclopedia, and one chapter entirely was about growing vines and trees. He said, quote, "The experience of ages has sufficiently proved that the wines of the highest quality are only grown upon vines attached to trees," end quote. Since then, we've lost most of the knowledge that was common to his time, and this practice of trellising vines rather than trellising, as Nicolas coins in this episode. So much of the work that is being done in Vitiforestry now is rediscovery. We aren't providing answers, we're asking questions. If you, like me, want to create a wine culture that isn't built on the fossil fueled industrial inputs, that is diverse and regenerative, then growing vines and living trees seems an important form of viticulture to consider. It has some obvious benefits, but it also has some obvious challenges. Like anything, there's some compromises to consider, and there are even more unknowns. I mentioned this in the episode, but I want to underline that all of this planning and designing of a vitiforestry system on this land in New York is not my idea. I'm just mimicking what's already happening on the land. Without any help or analysis or planning or designing, grapevines are already growing in trees all over the property. All I'm really doing is encouraging more of that natural cultural expression in a way that is easier for humans to manage and produce even more grapes and tree fruits. The context, the ecology of the land, is of utmost importance. For example, if I was planning a farm in California now, I would probably be thinking about agave and prickly pears and peyote rather than grapes and pears and persimmon trees. There are some things that we know about vitiforestry. One reward for embracing vitiforestry that's obvious is diversity. To me, diversity is one of the elements of beauty. As you'll hear, my primary goals for my vitiforestry project are to ask what viticulture might look like if we designed our systems, if we built our cultures to be beautiful rather than just efficient, to be self-sustaining rather than just productive. I want my farm, my wine forest, to give you a sense of wonder as you walk through it, and to be resilient when the fragile systems we've built quickly with fossil fuels come crashing down. I don't think beauty and wonder and resilience have to be at odds with living, but they might be at odds with my current mindset on some things. They might be at odds with our current dominant culture that exerts so much pressure on our thinking through its economic values. Maybe what I'm proposing is an alternative universe. I'll admit that, but I hope that I can share it with you someday. For now, let's imagine. Enjoy.
Okay, let's switch our jobs. I'll be the interview.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe I'll ask you about your process, and maybe just give us a brief overview of this permaculture design course, what you've did, and the steps you've taken. And I believe it's okay to say at this point that you've also done some slides that you would to share with
Yeah,
the listeners or
absolutely.
anybody
Yep.
who wants to follow along.
I will put these on the website at
Mm,
beyondorganicwine.com on the page for this episode, so that if people can link to this Google slide presentation of about, let's see, how many slides is it? About over 80 slides, or about 85
yeah.
slides, something like that.
Yeah.
80, close to
So
90 slides.
if we're looking at a slide, we'll let you know.
Right.
We'll give the numbers, and yeah, and the first slides I'm looking at, the first and second slide, and third, sorry, because this is actually giving you the overview of how you've approached
Yeah, the table of
your
contents is
design.
really instructive, just to see, that process that we talked about, but then to give that outline, just that those first 3 pages give that. And I should say this is through an online course through Oregon State University. It's a permaculture design certification course. I think I have nothing but good things to say about it. Other than my only complaint is like the online thing. You just have to understand that there are certain compromises that make from not being in person, but I think there's a lot that you gain from doing it online as well. Like you said, I think, yeah, I mean, for me, taking a class is always tough because the group think thing happens, can slow you down, can give you a lot of benefits, but can also like keep you from moving ahead at your own pace. And so doing it online was great, but also a lot of what I had to do was um, graphic design in Google Slides, which may in some ways is really important, because communicating the ideas
Yep.
behind the communicating is always a really important skill to have, and
Yes.
using graphic design for communication is really important. Therefore, it's one of those things you have to kind of understand you're getting into if you get into this kind of a course. But yeah, so that's the background, and I chose this site in New York that I fell in love with and now own, and want to develop. And it's a hollow, sort of about 30 minutes south of Ithaca, New York,
Mm.
and it's mostly wooded, but there are several meadows that total, I don't know, I want to say 20 to 25 acres, depending on how. And one of the meadows, I mean, most of the meadows have been sort of lightly farmed, like for hay,
Mm.
by
Yep.
a local farmer prior to me getting there. Sometimes tilled and used for corn, feed corn for cows. Um, and then there's one meadow that's kind of been given back to its successional thing. So it's in like its
Mm.
first stages of succession after
Mm.
being just, the initial grasses and things that come in,
Mm. Mhm.
forbs and grasses and annuals that come in. Now it's starting to get some perennial shrubs and things like that
Mm.
scattered throughout it. So it's in that second stage of ecological succession. Um,
Mhm.
but but is a really interesting, because of the whole site has been used and disturbed for the most part, and there is
Mm.
significant water in it. It's near the top of a watershed, so
Cool.
it's got a
Mhm.
lot of habitat, and
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
that's incredibly biodiverse, there's a
Mhm.
fox that lives in the hollow. I've nearly stepped on wild turkey nest in the meadow. Just, they're just nesting out in the open meadow. There's always deer,
Mm.
bear as well, and then everything else. I mean, those are the sort of mega, keystone species, megafauna that are there, and then there's
Mhm.
just gobs of everything else there.
Mhm.
So it's beautiful in that sense, and a number one goal for me is to not screw that up, basically,
Yep.
to not harm that. And then
Mhm.
number two is to invite people to see agriculture in a different way by what I design and develop there, and to invite people to reconnect with agriculture as specifically with these added value or enticement products like wine or
Mhm.
cider or some sort of co-ferment
Yep.
that people can be lured in with to taste and enjoy and sort of experience the land sensually, but then also maybe even get out and take a walk through a wine forest
Mhm.
that opens their eyes to other possibilities of
Mhm.
thinking about agriculture in a way that's designed around beauty and wonder rather than just productivity. So
Mhm.
that's the context in my brain. I'll put it that
Mhm.
way for
Cool.
this land. Uh,
Wow, great. Adam, you know what I love is I was just thinking, wow, I really want to have I really want to see that site now, and I think that's so beautiful. How you've also laid out this whole slides is really you've gone deep into what you want about this, and you can really formulate it just by me asking it so clearly. And I think that's one of the big powers of doing these courses, but also using this structure that the permaculture design courses offer is because it asks the right questions, like why do you want to do it, and what's your goals in all these things, and also gives you the language to express these things, but also um, you know you were saying something about that there's a part of the land that's being offered to succession. So there's in my head there was this, oh wow, great, we have actually not just what is normally quite more common is this open landscape where we have the grasslands, and then just like there's a solid wall, and then there's the hardwood forest, but there's actually
right.
this part in between, and
Yeah.
this is where the magic happens. All these
Yeah.
areas that are that are if you have all of these areas, not just the hardwood forests and the grasslands, which are great habitats and everything in themselves, but they really increase significantly in biodiversity when you have a successional part that is in between these stages. Yeah, that's really great. So you've chosen the right site definitely for your goals, and or you've I think you've probably developed the goals to that site. But I
Yeah.
think that, just to give you feedback on that, I think you've really done that quite well. I think I would have on my side, and it's not my point to tell my client what to do, but if I would hear you, oh, there's this successional part, and I really want to cut it away, my heart would bleed a little bit. But then again, that's also part of my job, not to yeah, I would point it out. I would definitely say that, hey, this is from an ecological aspect, this is great. Leave it if you
Yeah.
can, but if
No.
you can't, well, that's the reality, right?
Well,
But
it's
yeah.
one
Mhm.
two I have two thoughts for that site, for that
Mhm.
meadow. It's
Mhm.
slightly north facing and also
Mhm.
slightly wet. It's a pretty wet
Okay.
meadow
Mhm.
for whatever reason. I think there are some springs, and
Mm.
it just stays marshy in places.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So I mean, and regardless of that, one of the considerations that I had was, it's a beautiful site for camping or for like a small off-grid, sort of cabin, because you have this sort of surrounding forest. You really are surrounded by this whole thing, and
Mhm.
I mean, it's just a beautiful place to hang out and, like you said,
Mhm.
watch what happens there, because the whole meadow is like an edge ecosystem. So there's a lot happening there all the time. And it's deep enough in that you're away from, human, like the main paths that humans take around the land. And so it's much more the area of the other inhabitants of that land. And so you're sort of in somebody else's home and get to see how they live, see how they all are interacting with that space. So kind of a wild, and not wild, but a, really interesting space from that perspective. But also
Mm.
because of that, and because I'm thinking actively about how to produce
Mhm.
grapes and things that are delicious to many of these other inhabitants of the land without them eating those grapes, and totally destroying my ability to make wine or to have, product at the end of the year. So that meadow may become this sort of sacrifice, not
Mhm.
a sacrifice, but like an offering meadow to all those non-humans, where I'm going to intentionally plant other grapes and other food crops that I don't intend to harvest, that I don't intend to protect, so
Mhm.
that
Okay.
they will know that this is like a safe space for them, that will, I mean, that could totally backfire. I could just increase populations of all of these
Mm.
other non-humans, and then there would be even more for them who would want our crops.
Mhm.
But my hope is to sort of create some discouragement around
Mhm.
the crops that I want to keep, and then offer these other crops as like,
Mm.
there's no discouragement here, so help yourself and stay away from the other ones, kind of
Mhm.
idea.
Mhm.
But again, that might backfire. We'll see. Those are just some thoughts for that meadow.
Yeah, I love that, and I love the thinking behind it. Also, even though I admit I was smiling on this end of it, because of course, I mean, like you said, it might backfire, and yeah, I was just thinking about the bears that you mentioned, that somebody saw bears, and I was just like, oof, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have bears around our place at all anymore in
No,
most
it's
parts of
a
Central Europe, so I'd love to see a bear in my garden, but maybe, or maybe not. Well,
right. Yeah.
anyway, deviating here, but yes, I mean that's great, and I mean I think what is cool is to see how much thought you put into this, and also your ideas show you as a person, and you will and put that onto the land, and that's what I love about also when you go away from the standard model of agriculture, which its face normally looks the same everywhere. It's actually you're much it's much easier to show you and your family and people that live there what your values are, and really be able to live them. And I know there's some more sites on the land, just by looking at the project briefly before we started. I think there was a part of the land you were also mentioning is like a ceremonial land or something like that, if I remember correctly. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
so maybe,
th-
you know.
there's this very beautiful small confluence where, the main stream that creates the hollow, which is an east-west stream, and it's it's
Mhm.
it's perennial, but it does wax and wane in its strength, because during the season, from full to less full. I mean, because it's near the top of the watershed, so it's not drawing
Mhm.
from this huge area of water collection. But it's a permanent stream. And then there's another one that's,
Mhm.
probably when it gets really dry would turn into almost nothing, and is more of like a spring that kind of, comes and goes. But when it's wet, it's definitely
Mhm.
running, and most of the time it's running even when it's dry.
Mhm.
And they meet at a confluence area, right in the heart of the land, in the heart of the hollow, and there's a flat area right around it, right in the neck of the confluence, right beside the
Mhm.
confluence, that
Mhm.
sort of the land flattens there for, just a few meters
Yeah.
in a nice area where, easily, 50 people could gather around. And then the land of the hollow slopes up from around that,
Mm.
and the streams diverge out into different areas
Mhm.
and get steep. But there's just this little beautiful spot that,
Mm.
confluences have historically, I think, had
Yeah.
significance in many reasons,
Mm.
both
Mm.
metaphorically and practically, but also spiritually. And
Mhm.
it just feels like a site
Mhm.
where, it's worth having people gather there too.
Cool. Mm.
And there's a little waterfall right at the confluence as well, like a
Well,
little,
perfect.
yeah,
Sounds perfect. And
yeah,
sorry, I didn't mention that before I finished my answer. The question was actually that slide 81 shows this zoning that you've came up with. So for the people that want to check that out, slide 81 is where you can look at, and you will also
yeah,
see the confluence and the stream there. But
yeah,
this was just one of the things, these are the things that you think about, and this is perfect. Some other people might not, have that background, that socialization, or maybe they don't want people gathering on their farm for whatever reason.
right.
I'm just,
Yeah,
and I think this is just showing so nicely in your design is really your values and that this farm is not just a farm but it's actually a place for more people. It's a place for learning, and yeah. So that's you can also see it in your analysis and zoning that you've put out. And the concept of zones is really important in the agroforestry. Sorry, in the permaculture design, to find different zones for different parts of the farm where it's more maybe more for production, maybe something more for nature reserved, something like that. So, but yeah, getting back to maybe
yeah, please.
let's just briefly take us through your analysis, the way it was lined out in this course and the way you've done it. Maybe also mention what kind of tools you've used. That would be really helpful, I think, for your listeners.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, the first thing which I think I mentioned was like a personal survey,
Hmm.
and so that's just sort of like a self interview, a self analysis, which I
Hmm.
think is
Yes.
really interesting. Like,
So
I
that
mean, which we've already,
starts. Sorry, that starts at slide 5, right? Is it?
right,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
And then the very next thing is that land history, and of
Hmm.
course this land is the land of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The land specifically is right at the border between the Cayuga and Onondaga land areas, and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as Iroquois by the settlers,
Hmm.
oldest living democracy in the world, over 1,000-year old
Wow.
democracy,
Mhm.
and uh, arguably one of the inspirations for all of our modern democracies now.
Oh
It
wow.
was the new, a lot of new storytelling and historical research is. There's a great book called The Dawn of Everything, where it's actually
Mm.
what they called the native critique, where settlers came to the U.S. On behest of their kings, and met with people who were like, "What's a king?" Like, what do you mean? Like, what is obedience? What are you
Wow.
guys talking about? What is wrong with you
Wow.
guys? And they took those ideas back to Europe, and that
Mhm.
generated the Enlightenment and generated like all of these things which led to French revolutions and
Mhm.
essentially modern democracy.
Mhm.
So there's a really interesting and perhaps overlooked significance to the history of this democracy in the
Mhm.
world. At,
Wow. Okay. Yes.
where, and so it's uh it's a really special place in that sense. And that is what we were asked to look at, was like, how was this land used, and
Mm.
that made me go back and look at what was the history of this land? How did this
Mhm.
stop being Onondaga and Cayuga land, and
Mhm. Mhm.
and what happened? And essentially, in this history, I came across this podcast called "The Land You're On," which is actually done out of the University of Syracuse, by some members of the Onondaga
Mm. Beautiful.
who talk about that history of that land, of the
Mhm.
land you're
Wow.
on, the land I'm on. And
Mhm.
it's really interesting. I mean, it's basically, the Haudenosaunee sided with the French during the French and Indian War, and then of course the French lost to the English, and George Washington, to punish the Haudenosaunee, sent armies to New York to basically decimate and burn every
Mm-hmm.
all of the settlements there, all the, I mean, all of the,
Mm-hmm.
not settlements, but all of the villages and all the people and all the farmland of the Haudenosaunee, to, essentially starve them out and punish them for siding against the English, and which were the English at that time, or I guess maybe it wasn't the English at that time, maybe it was after the. I have to get my history straight, but
Okay, okay.
um, uh, yeah, so that's part of what happened with this land. So, and that, I mean, I could go on and on and on, because obviously there's so much to say, but
Yeah, yeah.
um, it's interesting that that's where this whole process began. And then,
Mm.
one of the great aspects of looking through this lens of permaculture is the next step is you kind of take this macro look. You look at like the globe, and you
Mm.
situate the land, in the context of the globe, and then in the context of the continent, and then in the context of the nation and
Mm.
the state, and then that local community. And so you start really big, and then you
Mm.
come in close.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and
this is
and it,
slide 8, right?
that's
Just
slide 8, yeah, yeah.
mm.
And then like what's there, like what's on the site, what's on the ground, what's it
Mm.
look like,
Mhm.
what's the landscape. And at each phase, so those are just the first couple of sections, but each phase where
Mm.
we were asked to look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, the SWOT analysis for
Yes. Mhm.
each of these things, which was always challenging. I mean, sometimes I was just like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
I have to do another SWOT analysis, like every section has a SWOT analysis.
Well, yeah.
And then what I found was some of the most profound insights happened as I forced myself to think about it in different ways. And I started realizing in so many cases the weaknesses became opportunities.
Uh-huh.
The threats and strengths were deeply related. Like there's so many fascinating things that happen when you start to
Mm.
do this as a discipline, when you're doing these analysis. And it's also where I started thinking, like, I keep talking about, like, here's all my fears. Like, this is the thing that I keep saying is a weakness or a threat. Like, how would I, in permaculture, they say the problem is the solution, and
Mhm.
it's, whether or not you care about permaculture or not, it doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
It's just a great way to consider looking at something like that, like looking at a design process where within the things that you're most afraid of, the things that you see as the greatest threat to your vineyard or whatever it is that you're doing, your winery project, within those uh, concerns is the seeds of what the solutions to that concern is. It's like
Mhm.
embedded within that is where you'll find how to work through that, is how you find to overcome that challenge. And so that's where, like when you really dig into that, is where I started finding some of the more profound things. So
Mm.
um, we did a lot of map drawing. So we had to, like, Google map the site, and then, drawing in the waterways, and then drawing in the water movement on the land, where the water runs, what direction it runs,
How
where
do you
it
do that,
collects.
Adam? Let's pretend I have no idea how to do this. How do you do that? How do
Great.
you do
Yeah.
that?
That is a great
I mean,
question. Um,
uh,
for me, I mean, so partly in Google, so with the tools of Google Earth,
mhm.
and then there's like an add-on that where you can add contour lines into that. So if you have a topographic map of your site,
Mhm.
and also just the knowledge of your site, I think is really important, because even with topographic maps, if you're working on a small area, a lot of times, the
Mhm.
sort of resources that, sort of national level resources that you have
Yep.
for topographical things are not going to show very detailed elements of your site. And
Yep.
so having a knowledge of your site, walking the site, I mean, I've walked
Mm.
the whole land multiple times, spent hours
Mm.
on the land, but then also, yeah, looking at the contour lines and trying to piece those two
Mm.
knowledge, like your practical on the ground knowledge, with this sort of overlay
Yeah.
topographical map knowledge, is how I found it to be the most effective.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, if it's okay, I'll just add to that, as you said, walking the site, And what I also find more and more helpful is drone footage. And I know not
Ah, that's
everybody has a
great.
drone. We have a drone for our company, but maybe you'll be able or in the market to rent one for a day or two, or have a friend that's just waiting to do this kind of stuff. Then get them out. And take drone footage of the land, and that really supports with the different angles. You just fly around your land, or the piece of land that you want to plan, and take pictures from all the different angles that you can, and it will help you get a better understanding of your site in general, its exposures, but also how water is going to flow. And yeah, as you said, using contour maps is what you need to understand and to be able to read to to understand where the water flows. You're lucky. You're basically in the game of having two major water or creeks or rivers running through your property that merge. That's of course not the case for a lot of people or everywhere.
Right.
But yeah, this is really vital to map out and to kind of show and see where's actually the water coming from, also outside of your site. I mean, that's also
Right.
important. You were saying that there's a watershed on top of your site, so just to bring that up again. And
Yeah, and
again,
that
this is,
actually,
if you want to look at this is slide 13. You will find these things.
yes, and we get even more so into. So we do. I mean, what's funny? There's almost like this redundancy to the process that we did, because we do this sort of water analysis, and then we come back to it at the end,
Mm.
where we do site water flow analysis, starting on slide 69, and that
Mm-hmm.
one. Slide 70, you'll see the actual watershed. So the perimeter of the top of the watershed is outlined, and you can kind of see how very
Mm-hmm.
close the property
Yes.
is to that top of the
Mm-hmm.
watershed, and where even that stream originates within the watershed, or
Yeah.
the two streams originate within the watershed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like the bigger, sort of meta
Mm-hmm.
analysis right before you go into design.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, some of the other things that are considered with that is, I mean, some of this is particular to permaculture, but it can't hurt anybody in anything, is
No, no.
um, the climate survey. So then you start looking again, we're still in the meta sort of analysis, but like,
Mm.
what is the historical data for your area in terms of what is your elevation, what are your average frost-free days, what is the average high and average low
Mm.
during each season, what are your precipitation records, and like what's your average precipitation throughout the year,
Mhm, mhm,
and so that kind of stuff. And then you begin to build from that, this sense of like a rhythm of the rhythm
mhm,
of the land, and how it pulses with weather and pulses with water,
mm, mm,
and then another thing is particular to permaculture, I think, is this sector analysis,
mhm.
where
Yep.
you basically put circles or partial circles
Mhm,
that
mhm,
are where different influences come onto your land, whether it's water,
mm,
whether it's fire, whether it's the summer sun, the winter sun, the summer wind, the winter wind, and
mm,
then neighbors and visitors, and essentially like the human element, what sector do they does that approach
mhm,
your property from, your site from,
mhm,
and wildlife, where does that,
mhm. Where does it come
this
from?
is so the non-human stuff,
Yeah. Mhm.
and then
So that
again.
was slide 27, by the way, for the listeners.
Thank
The
you. Yeah.
compass. It's a really nice compass you made.
Thanks. Yeah. And then you another thing that's particular to permaculture is zoning. So you have
Mhm,
zones 1 through 5, and zone 1 is like essentially where you live and act daily, and zone 2 is also daily, but not you're not like you
mhm,
have to walk out into it. It's not
mhm,
like where you
mhm,
live and act, all the time. And then
mhm,
it goes from there. So you're doing, zone 3, you're maybe doing, bigger farming and stuff like that. And then zone 4 is, maybe it's woodlands, but you're doing some management of it. And zone 5 is essentially, the unmanaged part of the world,
mm,
that sort of wild zone, that part that you leave,
mhm,
you know, the, and that you kind of
Hmm.
yeah, you leave untouched, or
Yeah.
basically you observe it rather
Hmm.
than try to manipulate it, essentially.
Mm.
And and you can think about this, and I mean, a lot of people who go through this process are doing this in urban areas. So you can think
Yeah.
about this even, maybe in Los Angeles, my zone 5 would be the beach, where I'd have to go out to the beach and like check out the ocean and think about meditate on the ocean to get my zone 5 influence in my life. But
Hmm. Hmm.
there's different ways that you can approach that in different areas and
Hmm.
different contexts. But the zone thing is something that you think about.
Hmm.
um, and then again, water survey.
Hmm.
But this is like where you get your drinking and drinking and waste, like where you get your drinking water from, what you do with your wastewater, and how that's managed.
Hmm.
And then also, what's happening with rainfall on your site, which
Hmm.
again, water is a huge thing. Then we did soil analysis. So there was soil mapping and testing. Since I had multiple meadows, I took soil samples from each meadow, which is
Hmm.
also a great process anywhere you are, to not
And
only,
also very important, I think,
yeah, not just
especially
to
in the
look at,
land you
I
want
mean,
to farm.
yeah, I found out that the pH in one of the
Mhm.
meadows was actually like 4.5. So I'm thinking
Wow.
blueberries for that one.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, because
Mhm.
that's just a incredibly low pH, very acidic
Mhm.
soil. At least, and I'll probably have to retest that. I only dug one hole there, and I could have gotten a
Mhm.
skewed sample from that. I didn't do. This was,
Mm.
not for this wasn't as thorough as I should have been. I put it like, soil sampling is like you dig like a dozen
Mhm.
holes from all over the meadow, and
Yep.
then do
Exactly.
an amalgamation and sample that.
Yep.
I just dug one hole. I was done
Well.
with digging that day.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean that's something we really put a focus on, and also understanding, especially for perennial crops like vines are. I mean, the understory soil is to understand and to know what kind of soil it is, because it also affects which kind of trees will work on that site.
Right.
If they have to dig a bit deeper, to stay there. But yeah, just to add to your what you just went through, I mean, we had a bit of a quick run on all the different aspects of your survey, but yeah, I mean, the climate survey is I think, together with the soil survey and the talk with the farmers, for us, it's the most important,
Yeah.
to kind of form the goals and what is possible and realistic on the farm. So
Yeah.
for anybody that wants to kind of focus on things, I think that is the most, that you should have a very clear and a very good answer to. And there's also the best data to these things. Um, the sector compass is something that you can use later on. Is one of the tools that you can use later on to visualize when we're actually planning the sites. Because remember, guys, everybody who's listening, we've been talking about what Adam's been doing here, but we haven't even talked about what he's going to do. So
Right.
this part of what you were saying, these 9 weeks of analysis, of your 10-week course, that is, it's important to do these things and do it thoroughly, and they will all come as information into your into play once you start actually designing your land, or mapping out the zones that you've mentioned, but also visualizing just helps a lot of people when designing a site. So this compass is very helpful for some people. But yeah, let's carry on. I think, yes, there's one or two more chapters that we could look at.
Yeah, yeah. After the
Mhm.
soil tests, the ecological survey, I thought that was really
Yes. Hmm.
a really good one. Where, and this is where you realize your ignorance. I mean,
Well,
unless you're really well informed, but just like
uh,
when you start digging into, what,
mm,
like what are the, like what would you eat seasonally? Like what are the actual things that
mm.
that are edible that actually are on the landscape right now,
Oh wow.
that you
Hmm.
could, that could be a food source in every season. And it just can be like, that's a great question, and I'm gonna have to do a lot of research about that because I have no
Hmm.
idea. But yeah, and then like what medicinal plants are on the property. uh,
Hmm.
yeah, so these are, I mean, this is maybe
Hmm.
asking you to look at things that you that have no what
Mm.
or you think have no import to your
Mhm.
project. Yeah, I want to plant a vineyard. So like what do I care what the edible plants are on my property? But
Mhm.
this kind of ecological exercise I think was I mean it was just revelatory for me. Like
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
just digging into having to do the research about like what do people do, like how did people live on this land.
Mm.
Like when this was all they had, when they didn't have
Mhm.
exotics, when they couldn't go to the store and get things that were
Mm.
imported from somewhere else, like what was going on, like how is this
Mhm.
possible? um it's I mean it was just yeah it's mind-blowing to me anyway. I mean I'm
Mhm.
fascinated
Mhm.
by this kind of stuff, and it also makes you appreciate some of these
Mhm.
things that you might have just cleared. You might have just like
Mhm.
let's bulldoze that because the vineyard's going to go there, and then you realize that that's like an
Mm.
incredibly valuable food source in the
Yeah.
winter for pretty much everybody that lives on this land.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if I eliminate that, like what are we all going to do? Like what are the
Mhm.
deer going to do? What am I going to do when that's gone? So it's
Mhm.
it's things like that. I mean that's maybe like a really rough example, but it's
Mm.
that kind of thing that yeah forces you to realize that your actions in putting in some farming system have
Mm.
lots of implications to the local ecology,
Mhm.
and makes you work a little more carefully.
Mhm.
And then this might again be another um,
Mhm.
permaculture thing, but sort of niching down on the zone thing. We were
Mhm.
asked to look at the microclimates within the site.
Mhm.
Now, for my site, I think I felt this exercise was a little um, like it was almost the site was too big. Like every microclimate there, I mean, like
Oh
I
yeah.
could have
Mhm. Right.
listed like a
Yeah.
thousand microclimates on this site.
Yeah. Just the two creeks probably
Right,
make it.
right. I
Mm.
mean, so just, but if you're, it can be helpful on a smaller site as well. It wasn't completely without use on this size of a site. I just feel like the most important part of it for me was sort of the microclimates that were in combination with plant life and like where I would find them on the land. Like, why am I finding this species here, and thinking
Mhm.
about what the conditions are that make it that made it possible for this plant to express itself in this place.
Mm. Mhm. Exactly.
So that was I did find that really helpful.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm. This is a good thing to say and point out is, at the beginning, what you're doing now or what we've went through now is basically just looking at the different surveys that you can do, but actually linking them together is actually what brings us the true information to make it clear, make a
yeah,
better decision on what kind of species we can plant on the site and on the land. And I think you've done that quite well here on slide 57, where you've put down plant species that are typical to area one, like this was the white pine, and in a south-facing, exposed, breezy microclimate, but it's also forest, right? So, you've linked basically a microclimate and a situation to certain tree species or plant species.
right,
Um,
yeah,
and this is
yeah,
where some of the magic's in later, if you are able to do these links. And I just had a funny moment in the sense of that I was always, when I was doing these kind of courses a couple of years back, I was always annoyed by the local ecology survey, not because I didn't like it, but I used it for some arable land here, and basically there's nothing to find. So I thought, what the hell? What's the point of doing this? But there was basically nothing growing, and that's just this devastating state if you think about it. That a lot of our agricultural land is in. So anyone that maybe had the same thought coming up when Adam was talking about the local ecology survey, that you think, yeah, what should I be eating except from the grains that are growing during summer there? I don't know. Well, exactly. That's how poor the landscape is, and quite a lot of on quite a large scale in most of the US, I guess, and most of Central Europe where we live here. Um, just something to put into consideration. But again, if there's nothing to find, if there's not much to survey, well, you're done quickly. That's I guess the nice part about it. But it shows that there's also quite a lot of room to improve and
yeah.
to do something. And yeah.
Yeah, and I mean,
Right.
it's worth saying that, I'm incredibly privileged to be able to,
Mm.
have access to this land through
Yes.
all the chances, chance
Mm.
things that make up who I am and have had the life I've had to lead me to be able to buy this land.
Mm.
I feel very fortunate, and I know that this is,
Mhm.
land access is a huge,
It
huge
is.
thing
Yeah.
that
Mm.
just, is getting harder and harder as gaps between wealthy and poor increase
Mm.
exponentially.
Mm.
So it's, there's a whole discussion to be had about that, and like what's
Mm.
possible on a small piece of land versus like this size piece of land versus like, a
Mm.
huge ranch size piece of land.
Yep.
But yeah, it is the again, just working where I'm working, and then
Mm.
this I mean, I'm just going to continue on. So then after having all
Mm.
done all this analysis, then we start looking at plant system design, which I love that
Mhm.
phrasing in this. This is on slide 62, section 12, plant system design, where it's like
Mhm.
thinking about farming as a plant system, or whatever it is that you're doing, like thinking about your design as a plant system. I don't know. There's something. I'm just repeating that, but I, the one thing I was gonna point out from I mentioned how this breeding section, it sounds so funny when I call it a breeding section, but where the nursery, where I will
Yes.
be breeding vines and trees,
Mhm.
ideally in this, I've chosen the section that is probably the most frost prone because it's at the bottom of a slope and it's
Mhm.
kind of
Mhm.
level, and sort of next to a hedgerow where the cold air will get trapped in there. And I've done that intentionally because I want anything that I'm breeding, and any of the plants that I'm adapting to live on the site to be super hardy. Like I want them,
Right. Mhm.
if they die in that site, great, then they didn't make it, and if they survive in that site, they'll do well anywhere on the
Mm.
site theoretically.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I'm actually situating the nursery in the harshest environment microclimate on the site, as a way to weed out the children that are not going to be well adapted for
Yes. Yes.
climate change,
Mm.
for a harsh future.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's one of the
It's the,
cool things that
yeah.
came out of that.
Mhm.
And then
It's a
that,
beautiful way to think about breeding your own crops, and well, I'll definitely have to get into that again because I'm interested in what kind of vines. But yeah, we'll get to that later, I believe.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're
Mm.
kind of there. I mean, this is
Mm.
where
Mhm.
we
Yeah,
start
we
getting
are.
really into the meat of,
Mhm.
where in slide 65 you can see my hand drawn, and 64 you can see my hand drawn
Yeah.
layouts, which is the overhead sort of looking down, top down view of the way you would look at a map of a farm site design. And then 65 is the sort of cutaway, like if you looked,
Mhm.
if you,
Mhm.
cut across the slope, cut a
Yep.
slice out and saw it from in profile, what it would actually look like on the ground, where you get this polyculture situation. And
Mm.
this is, again, there's so many things that go into it that have to be, um, this is all like outline, but it's that I think that I to get to the point where I realized how much more I needed to learn, I had to go through all this, if that makes any sense.
Aha, yes. Yes.
But yeah, so this, I mean, if you have any questions about this
Mm.
is where I mean,
Well,
I envisioned
mm.
this idea of a vitiforestry
Mhm.
system,
Mhm.
where the trees essentially are living trellis posts, and they are festooned with grapevines that are draped between them. And initially, I'll be planting some of the hybrid grapes that I have come to work with and learn
Yeah.
about and taste, that I think
Mhm.
are the best in terms of their resistance, that
Mhm.
I maybe not may be able to grow without even spraying, ideally.
Mhm.
And hopefully this situation where I'm planting these specifically will
Mm.
add to that. It's a southwest sloping meadow, about 10 to
Yes.
20% grade,
Mhm.
with where they'll be elevated, in the trees, so they'll have a
Mm.
lot of airflow around
Yep.
them. and also frost protection, things like that. Because of the slope, it'll
Mm.
slope away down into the hollow,
Mm.
and then the wind will essentially be comes out of the southwest. So if they're against contour, if they're perpendicular to the contour, the wind will essentially whip up the rows of vines. Will
Yes.
move through them much more easily and create a place that's less prone to fungal infection, things like that.
Mm. Mm.
So
Yeah, well, that's, I mean, you started going into these details. Just a quick question regarding the site. You were saying it's a southeast facing slope. Um,
southwest, yeah, southwest.
sorry, southwest. Yes, facing slope. And yeah, I mean, it's. I don't know if you look at the map on 63. It's a small part of your land, and
Right.
I mean, of course, the rest you would have to clear the forest and everything. But you've done your site survey before, so just let me let's wrap up briefly. Why is it this site, especially specifically that you want to do the married vines? Just give us your outcomes of your ideas and why is it this one? I think
Why
that's
this
important.
section of the land?
Yes, exactly. Why is it this site
Yeah,
and not the site 20, I don't know, 200 meters higher in the forest? And I mean, we could make the argument you clear the forest and plant them there.
yeah. Well, so
Mhm.
this side of the hollow is south facing, so it has some benefits, some compromises because of that. I think, I mean, depending on the year, obviously, some years
Mhm.
traditionally in this climate in upstate New York, you would want a south facing slope to help ensure ripening of the grapes. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you think we traditionally there might have been a pretty
Mhm.
short growing season between frost days, and you're often in a race to get as much ripeness as you can to have
Mm.
a tasty beverage. That's probably changing, and so that's where a
Mhm.
southwest facing slope could be problematic, where you might get too much ripeness actually in the future,
Mm.
or in the spring, it's going to be one of the first places to warm up, which might
Mm.
cause things to grow quickly, and then a late frost could come in and kill that growth
Mm.
on that slope specifically. Although obviously I'm situating it, part of the benefit of the slope and everything else is to prevent as much frost up, but we're
Mm. Mm.
seeing things in that section of the world where freezes are happening, not even frost, but just
Mm.
25 degrees
Yes.
Fahrenheit for multiple hours in May. And so
Yeah.
anything that grew before that because it was in a warm site is going to get harmed. And so
Mm.
that's one of the maybe compromises. And so on the other side of the hollow, where a majority of the land is, but it's some of it's steep, some of it is riparian, and some of it is most of it is wooded. It would involve clearing a
Mm.
maturing mixed forest, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to not do that.
Yes.
I'm sort of opposed to removing trees from the world at this point in history. So everything I'm trying to do is to add more, and it just is antithetical. So that does mean that, like, I've limited myself to, yeah,
Yeah.
like I said, like on the south side, it's maybe going to be um, 16 to 19 acres of plantable area,
Mm.
and then on the north side, it might only be 6 acres, if you include that sort of
Mm.
successional meadow, marshy meadow that I was talking about. So
Mhm. Mhm.
this is one of the main sites, and the the way that I've chosen to plant it and the way that where I put it is next to the road. So this south side also touches the road, and it's where humans will most access and see what's happening here. And this part in particular is it's a way of leading people into something that's sort of familiar. I know this is getting a little far into the details, but
Mhm.
when people look from the road here, they will see rows of vines. They just won't. They'll so there will be something familiar about it. It won't be
Yes.
like
Mhm.
and I'm leading into the fact that on the other site, on the south side, there's going to be a totally different arrangement of
Yes.
this system,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
to demonstrate really what's possible with the system. But here, it's evocative of what people are already familiar with in viticulture, and so it's a way of easing people into a new experience without alienating them.
Yes.
And so I think that's part of it as well. But also,
Cool.
it works because of the slope and the water flow. I wouldn't. I think some years there can be a lot of water, and I don't want the water can be can really the soil can get really waterlogged, and so
Mm-hmm.
having um, I don't want to rely on planting on contour or having to terrace or anything like that, because I think this is in a part of the world where some people even tile and create drainage tiles under the soil because it's so wet
Yes.
at certain times.
Yeah.
Um, so this is, I'm planting, against contour with the slope, down the slope, to
Mm-hmm.
allow for airflow, water flow,
Mm-hmm.
and also this sort of sense of familiarity when people are first
Mm-hmm.
introduced to it.
I like this. Thanks for the explanation there. Because that's exactly. I mean, you could have cleared some kind of forest, but again, it's not fitting to your goals.
Right,
And that's
right,
that's what I'm trying to. I was trying to say at the beginning. It's
right,
somebody else who doesn't have that goal maybe would have come to the conclusion, I'll clear that forest. This is the better area to make wine. Maybe I
right,
don't know.
right,
You know, but so just for everybody listening, it's for me it's important to understand and to make to give a sophisticated answer, however it looks like, to why you're going to do something the way you do it, because and that's also the beauty of documenting these things like you've done, and that's what we also do in our work, is we've had some ideas, and we've come to a conclusion of how we want to do things, and if we have this to look at in 20 years, well, we'll understand again, why did we do it, and what were the goals, and did we actually achieve them,
yeah,
so this is very important, and I think this is just in general something that's not been done enough in agriculture, um, and we're just used to farming in sculpted and modeled ways, and just repeat them and over and over in other parts of the land. And I think that's part of our problem in our is this very maybe the only thing that's being analyzed is the land capable of producing potatoes, for example.
right.
And if that doesn't work out, well, you don't do potatoes there, but that's it. Instead of asking the question, hey, what would actually fit to the land? And I think that's what you've done beautifully. I mean, of course, you came with the idea of growing vines, and
Right.
you want to make wine. You're working in that field, and you love it and everything. But still, as you said, you were open to the idea that this might not fit to a site, and I think that's really part of that. Um,
If
but yeah,
if I
okay.
can
So now
can can I
we
point
understand.
out
Yes,
two things?
sure.
Um, one of the questions that I was asked, one of the questions that I was asked to consider in
Yes.
putting together this plant system design was, or that I was asked to incorporate in that, by this process, was what are the wildlife movements in the land? Like
Mm-hmm.
where do the deer move? Where do where do these things go?
Mm-hmm.
And that actually created the blocks, the quote unquote blocks of this hillside meadow, because I
Right.
created pathways where I've
Mm-hmm.
seen the most animal movement, and where I've seen them,
Mm-hmm.
where I've seen the beds and where I've seen the tracks and how I've seen them move in the
Cool.
land. um,
Nice.
Gave me this idea of like, well, I'll build a block so that they can move around it, essentially. And so it actually informed that. And at this stage, like on slide 63,
Mm-hmm.
and 64 and 65, I still hadn't considered how much I might integrate water and things that like water into the system, because this can be a really watery context. I mean, it can be,
Mm-hmm.
very wet there. And I'm, so at this point you don't see a pond drawn into that
Mm-hmm.
hillside, those hillside vitiforestry blocks. And then
Mm-hmm.
later on, you'll see that like I started thinking I should put a pond up
Mm-hmm.
at, on the high point of this meadow, for multiple reasons, to create beauty.
Mm-hmm.
People love ponds and the
Mm-hmm.
streams that flow out of them. It would break up this meadow in a way that I don't think is necessariness. I mean, it's a beautiful meadow, but it's also like it would be maybe even more beautiful, arguably. And it would also
Yes.
break up the idea of this linear like rows of vines. If I had to plant around water features, if I had to design around that and think about that.
Mm.
But it also provides a practical application because I plan to have animals and
Mm.
waterfowl who are grazing this, and so having a water feature for them to get water
Yeah.
from throughout the year is just a practical consideration that I don't have
Mhm.
to like put in water troughs that are big plastic bins, for them. I mean, maybe I'll be doing that. I'm not like opposed to that, but
Mm.
to be able to have a water source that is integrated into the landscape where they can get water seems really smart as well. If I'm not carrying or pumping, whatever. So this all came into play.
Mhm.
Already I'm at slide 65, and new ideas were still sort of percolating about in this
Mhm.
design. So
Mhm. But that's just, that's what I was saying at the beginning, was this process that is happening inside you. You start, doing some design, and then you come up, but wait, I actually do, I have this, I want these animals, and it would be nice to have for them, and also, my goal is beauty, and and you kind of you reiterate your designs permanently. It's quite very common to to make several designs to really come up with something that you feel is truly fitting, and that's perfectly fine. And
yeah,
just a good example of it. All right, cool. But
yeah,
that's a good explanation. I was wondering about the blocks, but then yeah, that's a good the deer movement, or wildlife movement is a nice, yeah, it's a nice way to look at it. And and maybe also something to point out. Um, this is one way to decide how to make blocks, right? But whatever, is this is Adam's way to do it, and maybe mine would be different. I don't know.
right,
I
yeah,
haven't thought about it, but this is okay. And I think this is what I'm trying to say is we all have our different reasons to look at things, and some might seem crazy or irrational for some people, but hey, this is it's also your land, and it's also you're leaving your kind of style and imprint on this. Um, but there's a reason for it, and I think this is what I was saying before: is this whole idea of having a sophisticated answer to these things is quite good.
yeah. And I think,
Being
I mean,
more sophisticated and maybe saying, "Hey, this is how we've always done it," which
right,
is
right. Well, and
sadly the answer that we get a lot.
well, and it's, I mean, as much as the animal movement. Well, I'm saying animal movement, but they move in ways that have a wisdom embedded in it. So they're
Cool.
moving with the contours of the land in response to the geography and
Mm.
the ecosystem. So when they have paths, it's important to look at them and ask why. Like, what is happening there?
Mhm.
Like, is the soil changing? Is the slope changing? And
Mhm.
in the case with these blocks, all that comes into play as well, where there's like a slight change in the direction of the slope or the contour of the slope. And so that's of course where they've sort of found their niche in terms of a path and a movement area.
Mm.
So it's a combination of things, but they've actually given me the key to see those other elements, and to explore, to look for them. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, very cool. Um, yeah, well, okay, now I'm looking at slide 65, and which is showing basically showing us the design um, of the your trellising system, or hmm, is there a new word that we can find? Tree trellising, something like that.
Right, right.
A treeless, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
um, anyway, um,
Tree
and
listing
yeah, I
system.
just exactly, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that's cool.
And there's a site similar to that in Germany, which is, I mean, the trees aren't the trellis, but they have been planted very densely. And I think I was talking about this in the other episodes, so I'll make it quick. It was saying basically they had one tree in, no, not one tree, sorry. They had the trees in every row, every 4 meters, and they would plant two vines next to it. So it was actually a site planted to study the interactions between vines and the trees, if they would exchange nitrogen, carbon, and water, and if they were affected in any way, was questions that winemakers had, but they weren't really looked at least in the beginning of the project. So so deliberately they were planting these vines and trees very densely together also. And for me, I was like, oh, okay, this is one of the sites. I was thinking along a lot of for quite a while if I should show this to my clients, but there wasn't really any other sites to have a look at, and I was intrigued to see it. And then I thought, hey, let's see what the responses of the winemakers. This is going to challenge also if vitiforestry is really a thing to do. And this site is at one of the uh, least sunny areas of German winemaking areas at the Saar
Mm.
Valley, and so also again a site where you wouldn't really think it's a good idea to take sun away from vines. So this is this notion that we come into vitiforestry really, and we were all amazed. Like, yeah, this wine growing area that is really one of the coldest and poorest in the sense of that it gets the least sun in Germany. Makes fantastic wines that are known worldwide, but yeah, it's just
It seems,
not the idea, or not the place where you'd
yeah, no, yeah, that's what I was going to say. It seems like a strange place to do this kind of to add more
exactly.
shade and
Exactly. So
yeah.
I went there with our clients to see how they would react, and see how what they would say, and also talk to the winemaker that was making wine with these vines, and it turned out he was talking very positively about this, and also the results showed in the studies that were done there, and so I kind of wanted to yeah, from because my preconception of it was this is probably going to be a horrible site, and I'll probably because it was planted so densely, and how on earth should any good wine come from this, and I was feeling either I'd lose my clients at that point, but then I thought, then again, maybe then it's just not a thing, and I'm also a friend of saying that maybe it's not agroforestry. I was giving this big talk about why I think agroforestry is great, but it's also not a thing that we need to do, right? So that if there's a place where it just doesn't fit, well, for maybe ecological reasons, even um,
Right.
uh, um, because it's just supposed to be an open meadow. Well, maybe that's a good thing not to plant trees there. And so I was open-minded about that and thought, well, let's see how they react. And everybody was really positively, and that's why Staffelter Hof and places like that and other of our clients have done the have taken the step to plant trees in their vineyards and shrubs and hedges and all that. So I from your design, what you've come up here was it's actually really close to that design. And for anybody that now looks at the slide 65 and thinks, God, this is going to be you're in one of the most elevated parts of the US, and also elevated in the sense of being very high north and very cold area. Um, I think our preconception of vines and how they work and what they need is maybe wrong. I'm still I'm still in the gist of figuring this out. If
Mm.
But it seems weird, and that in these places that the wine was actually benefiting from the trees. There was actually the Riesling vines, for example, had more water in their leaves than the ones without the trees. Things that we would say, hey, isn't the tree taking away water and
Mm.
from the vine? I think that this kind of system of pollarding the trees, so cutting the trees back every other year or every third or fourth or fifth year, is actually keeping them in a size where they are manageable, and also not as strong as a competitor against the vines. And also, if we think about it, of course, the vine is a climbing plant, and this is actually where they used to root and get nutrients from. So maybe there's something that we don't understand yet fully about how vines grow. Um, Yeah, that gives this big potential for this kind of vitiforestry systems. And if you think about it again, why would do this with trees? I mean, these are living trellis systems, so these will outlive. They will actually get better and stronger with time. Instead of posts that degrade, or that we have to use a lot of chemicals that they don't degrade. Um, and that is some of the chances that we have with these kind of systems, is that it's actually, and again, it's also hopefully more economically friendly. And I think there's this big argument to be made that there's a kind of an ecosystem happening and being that is actually, you know um, if you look at most wine and how it's grown, it's not a in any way and form even close to resembling a real ecosystem,
Yeah.
because it's just this kind of monoculture system, which is just not natural in that sense.
Yeah.
So, you know, just wanted to bring that in here for the listeners. This is some of the things that we've seen, and on sites that have been around for, actually, this site has been like planted 15 years ago. Actually, they've been pollarded several times, and um, problems like sunburn haven't occurred, or very little amounts have only occurred in the agroforestry system. Whilst in a year like 2018 was very sunny year with a lot of sunburn, there was other sites that had 20 to 30% sunburn on their white wine grapes,
Oh,
which
wow.
affects the taste and the quality of the wine. So again, that's these are the aspects where we have actual chances through the vitiforestry to gain also something quality wise. Um, and as I said, also the microclimate, I said this before, might be beneficial to keep the style of wine that the wine region Saar or Mosel or whatever is actually been known for, and is not maybe as highly affected by climate change than it used to be. And maybe if we, in the Mosel Valley, we're really been known for the high acidity, minerality wines that come from the slate soils, of this amazing fruit, special fruitiness to it. It's something that we'll lose over time with climate change, because the grapes just ripen differently now, and have
Yeah.
higher alcohol contents and all that. So, long story short, I think there's these big chances in these kind of systems. Just to take this maybe away from you also a little bit, but what I love about your design here is the implementation of animals. And yeah, maybe take us through that before we get to the vine and the combinations of tree and vine that you've come up with, you've pointed out here.
Yeah. Uh, well, and I want to just add, I mean,
Mhm.
the thought that I have with these, to describe it for people who are too
Mhm.
lazy to go look at the slide.
Yeah, go for it.
Just kidding. If you don't go look at the slide, it's essentially, if I'll describe it, trees that are spaced. At the moment, my thinking is about 12 feet apart,
Mhm.
and then they're pollarded or cut off at around 2 meters high, or just over head
Mhm.
height, or around that
Yeah.
height, and at that height, they're allowed to grow new growth, each year or for a 2-year period, and then that gets
Mhm.
pruned back again. So they always stay at that height and never become this big thing. And then but they have enough leaf growth and new growth to provide photosynthetic energy to feed the roots and stay alive and keep growing and thickening
Mhm.
and strengthening, while the vines, sort of twine around them and drape from that pollarded top across the gap to the next tree, where they connect with the vine coming from that tree. So the vines are planted at the base of the trees and grow towards each other in
Mhm.
to fill in that 12-foot gap, but overhead at around head height. So I mean, the one thing that I was thinking was, like, if the climate consistently begins to get hotter and hotter in your region, and you've done a
Mhm.
system like this, well, you can just stop pruning those pollarded vines and let them
Yes.
grow bigger. And then now you've got a shade cover, a partial shade cover for those vines. Whereas, so you have this adaptable system that can
Mhm.
adapt as climate gets hotter, potentially.
Mhm.
Um, the so the animals, I mean, for me,
Mhm.
and this is part of, like, why I'm at Piscinus Ranch now, working
Mhm.
with the vineyard there, because it was designed for animal integration, and it's one
Mhm.
of those things that I don't know that much about, is like how to care for sheep and how to holistically manage sheep in
Mm.
a rotational grazing system. But that is what I want to do. And,
Mm.
I, as it's, there's a lot to manage there. And like an easy solution would be just to mow, like if you didn't want to have animals. I mean, animals
Mm.
introduce a lot of complexity and other
Mm.
things that you have to think about,
Mhm.
especially in this context of where this land is in upstate New York. They can have very
Mm.
long winters with no
Mhm.
forage for those animals. And so then
Mm.
you have to
Mm.
think about, where are you getting that from?
Mm.
Where is the hay coming from for them? Where's the feed coming from for them?
Mm. Mm.
So these are all questions that I, am working on and trying to
Mhm.
figure out. And I want a system that
Mhm.
ideally has zero input. So,
Mhm.
and I know that's impossible in our world to a certain extent, but shooting for that, like, how will I
Mm. Mm.
in February, like where we are now, how will my sheep eat? How will my
Mhm.
pigs eat? And
Mhm.
if the ground's covered in snow and under that snow there's nothing alive that they can forage, so
Mm.
what's happening then? Where are they staying? So, mm, there's there's a lot of different answers to that question,
Yeah.
but some of the benefits to this system is the idea of how this land, how to build soil on the land, build fertility in the land,
Mm.
while also maintaining it and managing it and having,
Mm.
um, a polyculture. Because essentially, like, if we're grazing pigs and sheep, they can be wool, they can be food. So you have, things that you can. Uh, they're useful in other ways. Geese and ducks are great grazers.
Mm.
If we're
Yeah.
doing mushrooms, they also eat slugs and prevent slugs from getting, decrease the slug
Mhm.
population that would eat your mushrooms.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's all these different cross benefits within a
Mhm.
polyculture system to having animals, that I just think, once you see that, it's really hard to envision a working system that doesn't incorporate animals and birds and other creatures. And to a certain extent, I'm hoping that the wildlife will be part of that system as well, which is also part of training these vines up high,
Mm.
to be above browse height, essentially, even for deer. But of course, there are things like raccoons that climb, and bears that, if they want your
Yeah.
grapes, they'll take your grapes no matter what you've done.
Yeah.
Um, and squirrels and birds. So these are some of the questions with the wildlife. And
Mhm.
but yeah, I think incorporating animals, to me, like, again, the ponds, I'm thinking geese and ducks, and they're great grazers. They don't dig like something like a chicken, which I love
Mm.
as well and want to use. But they have to be moved much more quickly, because they will dig, and they're much harder on soil. They
Mhm.
A lot of what they do is digging, and that's
Mhm.
and so ducks and geese are a little lower impact in that sense, and also
Mm.
love to graze. Whereas chickens aren't, they're grazers, but they're looking for grubs and stuff like that more than they're
Mm.
looking for
Mhm.
grass, or as much as they're looking for grass.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, yeah, I just think, um,
Mhm.
the other thing is to introduce, diversity, as much diversity as possible into the
Mhm.
land,
Yeah.
because I think animal diversity and, all this diversity of plant and animal diversity creates diversity in the soil,
Mhm.
which adds resilience and health to those trees and vines that are growing in the soil. So that perennial crop is benefited from all of this diversity.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, there's so many myriad ways that I think there are so many different benefits. But I was also listening to a great conversation recently, where it's like, when you're managing land, you'll do some new, let's call it a disturbance, or it's like a new, eh, technique that you're using to benefit the land, and you'll see immediate results. And so you want to repeat that again and again and again, and just make that this prescriptive thing. And um, I think, in terms of eco mimicry, I think one of the things to pay attention to is that we should think more of like a cross training thing, or the way like an athlete, like a high level athletes, never just do the same thing over and over. It's like, even if you're a runner, you need to work out your arms. You need to, like, and
Mhm. Oh, yeah, yeah.
even if all you're doing is marathoning, you should be doing like
Mhm.
sprints. You should be doing wind sprints. So there's all this, like introduction of diversification of management also is, I think, really important to the
Mm,
health of the land, because you might see an immediate response, but after time that will plateau and maybe level off and even
mm,
decline. Whereas if you keep mixing things up and introducing these new elements and different elements, you get these exponential growth in the benefits of the to the soil and the health of
mm.
the ecosystem.
Yes, and I think yeah, it's something we might also be able to reflect on. Actually, I think it's something I haven't mentioned at the beginning is actually I will start working part time at a biodynamic winery in the Mosel Valley.
Yeah.
And last time I spoke to, so that is called, it's called Rita and Rudolf Trossen. That's the two winemakers.
Hmm.
And something when I was there to talk about the idea of working for them, they said, yeah, it was one of the key elements and links that we're missing for a biodynamic farm or winery is actually animal impact. And I just want to say that this animal impact is quite profound. It's
Yeah.
and we have a great biodynamics teacher here in Germany called Martin von Mackensen, and
Hmm.
he's just a very great person who's really thought about these things from all aspects. And he was I was at a seminar with him, and he was mimicking a cow how she's eating um, the grass. And it's quite funny, this grown man, quite tall guy, standing on the stage and just just like for quite a long time just mimicking a cow and then asking what is a cow doing, what's it, and it's kind of licking. It's got this long tongue, reaching around the grass, and it's grazing. What is it doing? Well, it's also spreading its saliva everywhere,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's basically his point was saying, hey, there's all these ways of how the animals, yeah, leave their impact on the land if we
Yeah.
look for it to see it. And that's a form of bacteria they're bringing in, and all that, and the nutrient recycling that is just something different if the grass goes through the cow as different, or through a sheep, or whatever animal it is. um, it's just recycled, recharged so much faster, and is bioavailable again for the soil so much faster. So this impact is quite great and profound. And I think, as you said, pointed out correctly, this is how organic farming also works. And I don't think we actually use the word too much today. Quite funnily, of course, this is to be an organic farming podcast, so we're looking at how to do it even better than organic, I guess.
Yes.
But
Yes.
trying to raise the bar, I think that's the way we should say, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, this is really also a core principle of organic farming. Okay,
Yeah.
well, cool.
Yeah.
So basically, when you look at this, you also have drawn the picture in a way that you said that the trellis or the vines are up about 2 meters, or the fruiting zone of the vine basically is about 2 meters high, or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that
That's the ideal
okay?
I'm gonna,
Cool.
yep, shoot for.
Yeah. So is that also inspired by the Dutch winery, Dasmus, was it called?
Oh
Dasmus?
yeah. I mean, well, so I mean,
Mm-hmm. I
they
because I
were,
listened to that episode just recently, and I thought it was
yeah, well,
great, and I
I
really
mean,
want to visit.
this
Mhm.
this I think this was more inspired by just looking back at some of
Okay.
the old texts from Italy,
Ah,
that
yes.
I,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
they, where they have it's what's it called, alberata systems
Hmm.
or married vine systems, or yeah,
Yep.
and they have, there's some old texts that have some drawings of the way that they used to do it, and there's still some happening, I mean, some of it's really crazy where they have these like huge walls of vines between, fully mature trees, and they're climbing
Mm.
like 20-foot ladders to harvest grapes, um so I'm trying to think of something that's a little more manageable than that.
Yep.
Although,
Exactly.
I'm sure that some
Yeah.
some form of ladder will be involved. And honestly, I want
Mm.
to try a few different things, because
Yeah.
like, I mean, there's so many different ways. Like you said, you've worked on multiple different ways to incorporate
Hmm.
trees with
Yep.
vines. Sometimes you just plant them next to them. Sometimes you plant them between the rows. Sometimes, it's like intercropping. Sometimes they're
Mhm.
using the trees as trellis. Sometimes you're controlling the growth of the tree through pollarding or something else. And then I would love to also let some trees and vines just mature in
Mhm.
full ways with just some
Mm.
training and pruning to keep them sort of from out competing each other,
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
strangling from the vine strangling the tree, or the tree
Ah, yes,
overshading the
nice.
vine or anything like
True.
that. And but yet let them both grow full. So
Mhm.
like, have like a true orchard where it's, planted like an orchard, but where every fruit tree has a vine in it as well, sort of draped on the south side of the vine of the
Mhm.
tree to be on the sunnier side of the tree, and maybe not just the south side, but to get that sense of uh, what it's like as a actual fully expressed organism that wants, as much as
Mm.
it can be, versus this one where it's more mimicking our idea of like a row of vines in it on a
Mm.
trellis kind of thing.
Mm. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and
Okay. Cool.
both have pros and cons. Like I think
Mm.
it's harder to bird net a full tree with vines in it versus like maybe
Mm.
the rows of pollarded trees with festooned vines. You could throw some bird netting over the top of that at harvest
Mm. Mhm.
or before harvest.
Yeah, and I mean, again, this also links to your idea of, trying out. You're basically trying to make a site that is trialing and these
Yeah,
different systems and trying to work out the pros and cons of these things, right? So yeah, that's also very fitting to that again, So for anybody who thinks, oh, this isn't that, you know, isn't that going off the mark a little bit maybe here and there? Well, no, it's also part. This is why I'm stressing the goals so much, because I always have that thing that when we do some projects and I present them in a seminar or something, I've learned to just have to really emphasize what the goal is, to explain why a certain outcome has come or a certain design has come up. Um, because it deviates so much from what we're used to seeing, and yeah, and again, we need places like this one's going to be to actually understand what's the best system for which context, really, or what kind of style of system could work for production oriented winery, whilst maybe somebody else doesn't need to live off as the wine that he or she does, but you know maybe it's they want to have a nice place where for people to hang out and it should look pretty, then maybe it's the one where the vines grow tall, and
yeah.
so you're doing a lot of pioneering and important work here.
Well, if I had enough land,
Mhm.
I would
Yeah.
love to do sort of a side by side
Mm.
trial where it was much more scientific, where
Mm.
where I
All
maybe
right.
did this exact same system but used like actual trellis posts and wires, and
Mm.
then grew
Well, you
them
could do
side
a
by
few.
side and in the same
Mhm.
kind of soil, and
Yep.
make the wine the same way, and then do a taste test and see,
Yep.
like, do we get any flavor
Mm.
benefits from growing with trees, or is it the
Mm.
same, or do we like it better without the trees, what I mean?
Mm.
Open to
Mm.
whatever we find. But
True. Yeah.
I'd love to do that. I'd also love to
Mm.
to do side by side, and this is something I probably will do. But some of those rows will each row will likely, let's say we have
Mm.
like 10 rows of one kind of grape. Each row might be a different tree, and so we'll see. Maybe we'll make a different wine from each row and see if the tree gives any flavor changes.
Yep. Yep.
um, so that, these are, I would love to do this. I could do this for the rest of my life, kind of explore these questions,
Wow. Well,
and hope
isn't there
to.
I think there's this flavor of, isn't it, eucalyptus? Some trained sums can detect Australian Riesling from through the eucalyptus or something like that. I've
That's
heard about
funny.
this somewhere. I don't know.
I think
Maybe
non-trained people can detect eucalyptus. It's pretty
probably
strong.
also. No, I'm saying, but that's their hint for Riesling from
Gotcha.
Australia. Sorry,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
that's fun.
Exactly. Yeah, it's cool. So, okay, now, I mean, we understood the idea of the pollarding and um, that you want to have different styles. Um, and you said you want to have the PV grapes or the resistant hybrids,
Yep.
um, and you also have the animals underneath, and
And
basically
and
the.
the
Sorry.
ideally, over time, hopefully start the nursery right away
Yeah.
at the same time we start planting for this. So what I would be breeding with would be the vines that are actually growing on the property right now. So they
Hmm.
are actual native wild vines, and I will be crossing them to hopefully find a vine that tastes great, and is super adapted to that microclimate.
Mm.
So that's you know
Yep.
which I think is, look, if you have the time and, and the means, is a
Sure.
great thing for anybody to do that's doing
Hmm. Hmm.
vines and grapes, because then literally nobody can make your wine. Like, you're the only person that can
True.
make that wine, because
Hmm.
that's your grape. Like, that's the grape from your farm. And
Mm.
I think there's something really special about that, if we're talking about terroir, if we're talking about really a cultural expression
Hmm.
through the products that we're making. That just seems to me like a really great way to go. So that's part of that. But continue on. Sorry, I interrupted.
No,
That just popped in
that's
my head.
well, I agree. I think the whole idea of terroir and it's always been a philosophical question to some degree, and I think this question is of where does it actually start? Doesn't it also maybe start from a variety of bread? Yeah, great,
Yeah.
great, great way to think about this. Um, for me, the next thing, so everybody who would be looking at the slides would see that from also my brief check of all the designs you've done, um, it is basically still in this rough sketch phase. That's what I would call this if this was a design done by us. So I hope
Yeah.
I don't want to undermine your design by any means.
No, no, no. It's
These
fine.
rough sketches are mostly what they are great, and we do these a lot ourselves, and they're the basis for the final sketch. And the final sketch is the only difference between probably the last rough design and the final step or final sketch is actually that when we do our designs, we do the design in a program called Quantum GIS, which
Hmm.
is an open source program, which is a bit annoying to learn. It's a very powerful program. So there's, mm, yeah, it's a for anybody who wants to go into down that rabbit hole. It takes time, and it's good if you have somebody to show you how these programs work. But why we use it is because we can use the data from that program to with our GPS system to measure in the site at the end. So we can basically what we draw down in the program is we would find the exact spot by centimeters. Like these powered the GPS systems these days are quite powerful, that you can have it by a centimeter or two. You will find the point that you've put down on your laptop or your computer. So what why I'm saying that is that um, I can put in the amount of vines completely exactly, so you don't have to overorder too many vines or something.
Right.
And also, we have the exact amount of trees. We know how long the rows are. All these things. It's a very powerful, very
Yeah.
nice tool to have. It's quite hard to learn. Unfortunately, it's not very intuitive. Because it's actually not meant to do these kind of things. It's a bit of a workaround that we use anyway. Don't need to go into that to too much detail, but for me, it would be the interesting. What would be your way to approach this now? If you've got your sketches and let's imagine you're happy with what you come up with, and now you want to implement this. What would be your next step? Because this is, from my experience, quite an important step. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. My next step would probably be that, to kind of come up with, to actually go to the site and
Hmm.
walk it with a measuring tape,
Yep.
and actually, like,
Mm.
whether it's using flags or sticks or something like that, but actually lay it out,
Mm.
at least lay out the area that I intend to plant first. I think this will be an iterative process for me
Yeah.
of, doing maybe a block and
Mm.
1 year, and waiting
Hmm.
till next year to do the next block, and
Mm.
probably over 5 years get most of, part of the beginning of it planted.
Mhm.
But there are also, there's some waterworks that I'm considering putting in there
Mhm.
too. So I think, I've
Exactly.
already started, talking to contractors about pond building. And so that,
Mhm.
this is another,
Yep.
like, just a real practical thing that I'm bringing up, which is like,
Yep.
some of these things are things I can't do myself without
Mm.
bulldozers and backhoes and stuff like that. So I
Mm.
need,
Mm. Mm.
a contractor who can come in and dig a pond. I mean, I could do it. I could dig a pond by hand, but it would take a while.
Well,
So,
yeah.
so
Small
there's that.
anecdote. I have a good friend. She's living in the Ticine. In case she's listening, hi Marta. um, Quite likely. So, um, but yeah, she's dug a pond by herself. I'm very impressed. It's in a steep slope in the Alps. So the Ticine is the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland, and
Oh,
they grow a lot
wow.
of wine there. And she's actually dug this pond by hand in the steep slope, and incredible work. So I was very impressed.
Amazing.
And
How
it is.
big?
I haven't seen it in person, but I
Okay.
think it's she showed me when I was there, and it was quite large. It's not a small surface area. It's
Wow. Okay.
yeah.
Well,
She said it took her about a year, but she's done it. Yeah, so
yeah, that's what I
impressive.
was thinking. Probably a
Mm.
year, and then I have several ponds to dig, so multiply
Yeah, yeah.
that.
Well, I guess it's been one for the workouts.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, look, I
Mhm.
want to work out like an hour and a half a day. There you go.
Well, there you go. It's cardio and strength, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
um, well, anyway, but yeah, that's great. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you too much, but yeah,
No, no, no.
please
That's
carry on
that's
with
that
the.
that would be it. I mean, so it's, yeah, like
Mhm.
going back to the land, because, since the last time I've been there, a lot of some of these new ideas have come up because of this
Mhm.
process that I went through.
Mhm.
And the last time I was there, I was actually like in the midst of the process. So I need to go
Oh,
back
mhm. Yep.
and actually say, like, okay, if a pond went here, what would that
Yep.
actually, what would be the implications of that,
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
what would be the consequences of that, and
Mhm.
walk
Mhm.
through that in the land. And then,
Mhm.
okay,
Mhm.
great, then maybe I need, if that all sounds good, if that all looks good, then I need to plan the planting around that space, because that space, now won't be vines. I've just
Mhm. Yep.
I've offered I've I've traded that piece of land for
Mhm.
water rather than for vines, which,
Mhm.
um, is another thing. Like, I'm not working with a lot of land there, and I mean, it's a lot relative to some things, and it's a tiny amount relative to other farms. And so,
Mhm.
um, I think for me, I'm also thinking of, like, I know what a viable, like, winery business
Mhm.
around where it needs to be in terms of acreage, based
Yep.
on average production.
Yep. Yep.
um, I don't know what the production of this kind of system will be yet,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
that's a big question. But
Mhm.
I'm trying to get at least to that same level of acreage that I think, most people, like, sort of with the Weinigheid Dasmus, what they're working with, I think, is a big enough plot to make a
Mhm.
living at,
Yep.
to actually, like, make a profit and be able to, pay
Mhm.
for all the
Mhm.
things that life brings you. And
Yep.
so I'm shooting to have that kind of thing, but at the same time, I don't want to, so, yeah, I say all that to say, every time I think about putting in a pond, there's also, that I know I'm giving up land that might
Mm.
be fruit
Correct.
production
Yes.
land.
Mhm.
So that's,
Interesting.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
about that, and I want to look at the land for that as well. And yeah,
Yep.
uh, yeah, and I mean, one of the things that sort of, um, came out of this design process were these ponds, because there is so
Mhm.
much water, and it just seemed like a practical and, um,
Mhm.
kind of beautiful addition. Like, when I think about
Yep.
having a water feature in the land, or two water features that connect with a tumbling stream from down that meadow. um,
Yep.
then I also think, like, the ducks and geese seem like a really integral part of that, and then they're going to be making that water pretty mucky. And so, to clean that water up, I've designed sort of where the lower pond spills into a series of terraced growing areas where,
Mm.
I'm
Mm.
now thinking rice will be a great thing to grow.
Wow.
So
Okay.
it's
Right.
like basically rice paddies that will be fed by this nitrogen rich,
Mm-hmm.
goose and duck poop pond water. That will the rice will be fertilized, and they'll be turning that into food. And then when the water comes out at the bottom of those terraces, the water will be clean and can be pumped back through the system, so like through solar panels back up to the top pond, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the circle of life continues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As well as fish in that pond as well. So we've got an aquaculture
Yeah.
system, um, waterfowl, as well as watering the animals, beauty, and then grain production with the rice paddies. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
all from just like this one idea of like, wow, there's a lot of water here, what am I going to do with it? And oh,
Mm-hmm.
maybe like using water and thinking like about that. But that also means I've given up 3 acres of what would be great production land for all
Mm.
this. So
Wow.
maybe
Mm-hmm.
not three, but some amount.
It's
So
quite a
there's
bit.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, maybe less,
Definitely.
but um
Okay. Cool. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And then
And
the one other thing I think I mentioned to you was, so we talked about this upper meadow, which is sort of, rows of different kinds of trees with vines festooned down the rows, from the tops of the trees, pollarded
yeah.
trees. Um, this is reminiscent of what's happening now in a vineyard, these sort of straight rows and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And on this lower section of the other meadow, it's like the twin meadows. One is like a big southwest sloping meadow with a good slope, and then there's a sort of level meadow at the bottom of that that's about the same size,
Mm.
and it sort of has a gentle knoll in the center of this meadow. And the plan now is to do the same exact spacing, same exact design of the vines on the pollarded trees on
Mm-hmm.
the slope, but do it in a giant spiral that spirals out from the
Mm.
center of the top of that knoll. And thinking about this, you know, it just seemed like a nice way to at first incorporate this system, and still allow room for some of the full tree and vine systems around that, in the
Mm-hmm.
margins of that
Yeah.
meadow.
Yeah.
But as I began to think of it, and I talked, the instructor in this permaculture course was sort of questioning me about it.
Okay.
I, like I started to realize, like, in so many ways this it embraces the idea behind what I'm trying to do, which is like it's kind of showing that our agriculture system doesn't need to be thought of as this regimented, thing meant for production, meant for
Mm.
efficiency. But and because it's an elevated system, it's supposed to be like a wine forest anyway. So it's supposed to give you that
Mm-hmm.
sense of you can walk in any direction under the vines. And so the
Mm.
management of it doesn't really change whether it's in rows or in a spiral, in a giant spiral.
Mm.
Um, and
Mm. Okay. Mm.
and it also, instead of you having blocks and rows these are separate things, like you can count 1 2 3 4 rows, you can count 1 2 3 4 blocks, you now have one giant connected ecosystem, and it underlines what the whole point of of this polyculture
Mm.
system is all about. And so
Mhm.
I think that's it. You have to go a little deeper into the farm to get to the spiral, but hopefully by the time
Mm.
you get there, you'll see why it's there,
Mhm.
and see
Mhm.
how it sort of incorporates the true
Mhm.
idea behind the farm in the first
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. Beautiful. And it's going to be so incredible. I mean, you was basically we will have two systems to look at. Actually, if you look at it more closely, you'll see there's basically four blocks, right, with different
Yes. Yeah.
ways the rows are facing, and this will probably produce different wines. And
Yeah.
that's something I'm really intrigued, and I'm really curious about. Is how it's gonna, what's the effect of the tree is going to be on the vines, and will we be able to taste it? And I think in the interview with Jan and Kosi from Staffelterhof, um, we were talking about this aspect of, yeah, what's maybe it's also interesting, the effect that the trees have on the vines. Maybe they will the ripeness of the grapes of that certain vines that are more on the north side of those trees will be a bit lower or something. But isn't that maybe add to the flavor profile of the wines?
Right.
Isn't it going to make it richer, or at least more complex?
Right.
Does a wine have to be, of the block of a grape, have to be the same exact ripeness level and a sugar content all over the block? Does it have to be like that? And I'm not saying it's a bad thing if it is like that, but it's also he was making. I think it was Corsi saying that he was making the point of yeah, it's also maybe challenging the way our wines are being produced and also change the face of that. So I think probably we will see a difference in the taste of the wine that is going to come out of these blocks, and it's going to be really interesting, and maybe it's something really intriguing to also your customers there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. This is my thinking as well.
and um, I mean, there's one aspect we haven't touched on yet, which is would be interesting, I think, which is something I actually didn't mention that much before, but it's something that we look at in our planning is how do our customers sell their product.
Hmm.
And I mean, this is the whole marketing aspect of it. But I mean,
Yeah.
there's a point to be made to say, and I'm very open about this, but at least in Germany or probably most parts of the world, if you do something like planting trees, this is seen as something very positive, and people want to be part of it. And we've in the episode with Staffelterhof, we were telling you about the plantings that we do, where we get volunteers in to teach them how to do these kind of things and have them be part of it. And some of them are customers or just friends from the farm, and um, and there's this whole culture that we try to create around the plantings of our agroforestry systems and vitiforestry systems. And I think you've said that this piece of land is very rural, and you're growing vine probably. I don't know. Maybe you're the first to grow vines there and produce wine in
Yeah.
this kind of region. I mean, there's the opportunity. The market is probably there for you to sell. But yeah, please let us know what your plans were about how you will sell your wine and
But no, that's great. I mean, and you in thinking about market, I think you bring up like really the most important key to resilience, which is community.
mm,
You know,
uh-huh,
this the most important aspect of us surviving the future that's coming with climate
mm,
change and everything else is uh, the roots that are the metaphoric roots that we put down and
mm,
the connections, you know, all the connections that we make within with the people. And, you know,
mm,
actually, it's funny on you, right when you brought that up, I was looking at slide 86 where, you know, we were asked to talk about social permaculture
mm,
um, and what that, you know, how that applies to what we're doing with this
mhm,
design site. Um,
mm,
and yeah, I mean, in this particular area, it is not too far from the Finger Lakes wine region. I think it actually might be within the
true,
Finger Lakes
yes.
AVA.
Oh wow, yes,
Technically, it
yeah,
might
yeah,
be just outside of it, but it's close, and so there is some wine and cider tourism seasonally.
yep,
You know,
yep.
there's a lot of seasonal
I,
tourism because it's a beautiful area, a beautiful,
mhm,
you know,
mhm,
agricultural and natural area
mm,
in the U.S. and the lakes are a big draw, and we're a little outside of that,
yes,
but I think it's close enough, you know, that somebody who's some of the brave will not mind going a little off the beaten path to find us down there if they hear about us.
mm,
But yeah, that is the idea is again to draw people in, to give them an excuse to come and visit.
mhm,
One of those lures being a unique wine made in a unique way.
yep,
But why it's unique is really the reason
mhm,
for having visitors to have, you know, for them to actually sort of see and experience and immerse and walk through
mhm,
a wine
mm,
forest and to feel how it feels different from
mhm,
a normal vineyard and
mhm,
consider what that might mean for
mhm,
how other wine could be produced or how their food could be produced differently,
mhm,
or
mhm,
just how they could think differently about, you know, producing wine and food. or just living in the
Yes.
world. So
Mm,
yeah, but in terms of market, it's tough. It will be um, in some ways tough. In some ways, it'll be like a little bit of a destination, and that's part of why
mhm,
I want it to be something unique and special, because
mhm,
to for somebody to make that drive, make that
mm,
journey, for it to be not just another thing that they've seen, that they can see a little more closer and more comfortably to wherever they are.
yes, yeah, yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
I mean,
Mhm,
that's I mean, I love, I mean, this is just random stuff, but I'm part of wanting it to be a polyculture, and a farm that has no inputs, and a farm that
mm,
um, you know takes care of itself, that is a full circle farm,
mm,
would also be to have abundance, that it has outputs rather than inputs, and that
mhm,
all of the diversity can be tasted and experienced through the senses, through meals, and
mm,
things like
mhm,
that people can have when they come.
mhm. Yeah, I mean that is just imagine not having that thought, making that thought how I'm going to sell what I'm making. That would be fatal, I think, for a project like this. Um, because you would, yeah, as we talked about, you're going away from what is the norm, and yeah, and I think it's really important to be able to carry your idea, and I think that's again I have to applaud your the output of your course is you really the way you talk about this is you can really transport your idea, and and I think this is one of the benefits of doing something like these courses, or just
Yeah,
working away step for step through these things, because it will also create your identity for your brand also. And if you're going to go these steps, you know, make it part of your brand and not just be something, this is my funny site. I do things differently here. I think it's good to emphasize what you do there, and carry it through your wine brand. And yeah, that's great. And also, yeah, as I said, think about how to sell it, this is great. You actually realized, okay, there's tourism streams, people that, I guess, the Finger Lakes are not the area that's, that's probably quite eco-friendly. People will probably go there, not maybe the party people, and not discriminating, just trying to
right,
point
right.
things out. Um, just the so this is also fitting to those. I think this could be really attractive to these kind of people that make holidays in that area of the land. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's going to be exciting. I'm really I'm really curious. I'd love to have that time spinner thing that is a
yeah.
thing in Harry Potter, just to see what's happening in 30 years, just for like 10 seconds. Just want to see
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Oh, me too, me
Mm,
too.
mm,
Yeah, that's. I should say, like, I talking about this within the context of a permaculture course that I took, but of course,
mm,
this isn't. Permaculture is just
mhm,
one framework. You have, you
yeah,
obviously, through your consulting, have your own thing, and I mean, there's many different things, and of
mm,
course, there's tons of criticism that could be leveled against permaculture in some ways. I have valid criticisms, just like with
mm,
any system. And yet, I do think it does have some great tools and some great strategies for
mm,
observation, some great values behind it.
yeah,
Um, I'm just making it clear. I'm not trying to promote permaculture, but just, an analytical approach to
mhm,
slowing down and looking at land and being very thoughtful about how you
mm,
plan to do something with it, what you plan to do with it. But I heard something. I actually heard something recently that I thought was fun, that maybe we should
mhm,
actually consider an impermaculture. um, so like an idea of like the
yeah,
embracing the sense of our mortality, and the fact that we're going to be passing, and what does that mean
mm,
for our farm designs. um, yeah, and so I don't know. I like that
mm,
thought as well. As
mm.
like yeah, little.
Well, I mean, that's something, uh, but maybe that's also misleading in the sense, but there's no form of, no farm, no face of, or no way a farm has, we had the the talk with Staffelterhof, and with every
Yeah.
winemaker, the face of the wine are the wines that have been done, and the style of how the wine was done there. And this is the oldest, what was the seventh oldest business on, I don't know, the oldest wine business known, documented at
Yeah.
least. Uh, just the last two generations have made big changes in before Jan from the current winemaker there um, has started making also natural wines and stuff like that. So with every generation, new things come, changes happen. A lot of the land was actually changed. They've swapped a lot of the land now to have more bigger sites in one place because the compartmentalization of land in that area is quite strong. And so you have 2,000 square meters somewhere here, then you have a few here, and Jan made a big effort to swap land, so it's just more on one side. So it's quite normal, I think, to have these changes, but of course they're not quite, for us, quite a long time scale already. But considering geological time scales, that's nothing. It's not even a
Yeah.
second. you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's quite a normal thing, and to think that this is going to stay like this forever is probably not. Once you've implemented it, it's going to start changing already. You might find a spot where, oh, maybe this is, I always get stuck. Here it's too wet. I can't. I have to take the trees out here again or something. You'll be the first to start doing the changes in it, probably.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's a good
Yeah.
thing.
That's funny. I mean, I can say from my very limited project here in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
which began with just planting some veggie gardens
Hmm.
and some trees, and every year there's almost every year there's been like a major design change
Hmm.
to the whole yard. I mean, because now the whole yard is fully designed and landscaped, with edible landscape, edible or drinkable landscape,
Hmm.
a wine garden, and yet every year I've made, or we, Wendy and I have made a major design change to it, whether it's like cutting
Hmm.
down a tree or ripping out a garden or planting in a whole new section with something different than was before, or something that was there before is being totally redesigned. Like I went from VSP trellising to an overhead pergola trellising this year for the vines that
Mm.
planted
Yeah,
3 years
well.
ago. So it's, yeah, even this idea of like quote unquote permaculture, again, I think like, yeah, there's
Mm.
this sense of, yeah, more adaptable culture is maybe a better way to
Mm.
put it.
Well,
Something that,
yeah. I mean, maybe we are not. I don't think that is what is meant. That it's got to should stay
yes,
like this
yes,
forever. I
right.
think the idea is of. I think it's trying to emphasize the sustainability aspect
Yeah,
of agriculture, right?
agreed. Yeah,
Um, all right.
yeah, I'm just playing with it.
Hmm. I was just thinking. I just had thought about.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think we've gone through most of these things.
yeah.
Um, just for me, maybe some things that I would now, I mean, I'm not sure when you want to start realizing the project. Maybe that's something you want to go into, or is it not that you're not at that stage yet? I don't know.
I mean, hopefully, so in terms of actual like boots on the ground,
Hmm.
changes being made, hopefully this spring.
Cool. Oh wow.
But in
Yeah.
terms of planting,
Hmm.
in any major way, it'll probably be next spring.
Yeah. Well, that's at least the time you should. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's something maybe as a general, maybe if you want to hear my thoughts on that,
please.
it's great to take time to before you start planting. And I say that because you really have to take some time to check the availability of plant material.
Yes.
I mean, you were also talking about um, planting some pears and I think apples also, right?
Yeah.
So you might want to have the right variety. You
Yeah.
have some specifics, and then it's always good to take some time because normally, at least around here, they're just not always available, um, and it's just great to take time for that.
Yeah.
And rather not plant the tree and just wait another year and map it out. That's always a good thing. And also take it slow, because I mean, this is going to be a major project and a major thing to take care of and invest a lot of time and resources into at the
Yeah.
beginning. Especially this whole idea of getting everything started, it will and taking care of the trees and everything, that they will grow good and have a good start of their life at that farm. That's
Yeah.
just vital to any project, and I really emphasize that. And I sometimes actually talk our clients out of planting. And it really happens. Was it's a hard thing to do, but in the sense of, of course, I want to support them, and that they do the idea, but it should be, um, or I will stop them to plant the project in 1 year completely, and tell them, hey, maybe let's start with this block, see how you get along with it, and then do the next one after. That's really vital, because I think there's a lot to lose along the way if you do it too much, and less is more in that sense, and all, because it really affects your you personally, if these things don't grow properly. Like, you can really see these are big, very important projects to people that we work with on a personal level, and if they don't really, if they see, man, I couldn't just, there's this one block, I had no chance of watering it at all, and now you see plants maybe even dying. Well, that's not great. Also, just on a mental level. So I always make the stress the emphasis of take it slow, and what's 1 year, but it's much better to, also for your purse, of course, to go slow.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, okay, so I mean, that's pretty cool. So you'll be there soon in spring. That's wow, that's very soon.
Yeah.
I was expecting something like 1 or 2 years or something like that.
Well, it's been a
That's wonderful.
multi-year process already, so
Well,
I think,
yes,
yeah, so I think, yeah, I'm ready to go at this point.
well, good.
Ready to like measure and actually, take
Hmm.
these ideas again and lay them
Hmm.
on the land in
Hmm.
person and see how they lay, see how they
Cool.
lie there,
Well,
but
yeah. Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, it's yeah, it's been a multi-year process getting to here, so I think that's why I would say that. It wasn't like started
No,
last
no,
year
no,
and
no.
now it's been, yeah. And I mean, honestly, like this podcast, talking to people, getting
Mm,
has been a huge part in the development of many of these ideas, just
mm.
thinking through, um, learning
Oh,
about,
sure, yeah.
yeah, like ecosystem health, and
Hmm. Hmm.
it's all of it's coming into play.
Cool.
So yeah, that's like
Nice.
5 years of of talking to smart people about these kinds of things.
Well, that's. I mean, I'm glad that this is the kind of outcome that it has. I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty impressive. It's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, yeah. um, and okay, so these next steps. I mean, I kind of asked that before. So the next steps would be looking at contractors to come in and do that. The pond work, I guess, would be one of the first things. At least from, if I would approach it, or if,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think so.
Cool. Hmm. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then kind
And
of, yeah,
and
because
and,
then we
and
have
your
to work
nursery,
around
right?
that. Say again.
Sorry. The nursery, your vine
And the
nursery, you said?
nursery, yeah, that's the one I want
Mm-hmm.
to jump on right away as well. I mean, that one,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's,
It's good.
the area for
It's a
that
side
is
project, right? Mm-hmm.
pretty straightforward. And yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
I want it to be such a central part of it. And because, getting to any sort of usable outcome can take so long, it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely the one to jump on as quickly as possible. Yeah.
True. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Great.
are
I mean,
there
it's
having,
exciting, and I mean, you know, I'm sure you're in contact with other people, other growers from the region. Is that you're still, selecting grape varieties, I guess, and is that still,
yeah,
are you still in that process, or?
yep, yep. And I mean, having said that, I mean, tree, grape, finding sources for those, which
Hmm.
I sort of have, but it's funny you say that, but like 70 page, or the slide 75 through 77 is called local network survey. And so
Yep.
it's
Oh,
actually
very good.
asking you to think
Hmm.
about, like, who do you know in the area, and what, like, who
Hmm.
shares your values nearby, and who can you who can you ask questions to, and who can you go to when
Hmm.
you need, you know need resources for what you're doing.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, exactly. Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's the cool thing. That's what I really appreciate about the permaculture, or in this permaculture course. Unfortunately, it's not like this in every one, but it's actually really thinking about all these things, and it's really worth going through that. And it's actually a nice project process, because sometimes you have people, also clients with us, that think they don't have any resources at all, and then they actually have a good network. They have good people that will support it. They might have somebody that will even lend them money or whatever it is. These kind of things, they're quite big factors in the end. So um, yeah, that's great that they're
yeah,
in there.
yeah.
Um, nice. And then I guess you also have to do some changes in with the house and everything. You probably got to start
Yeah, so this
furnishing
is like
a cellar.
this is quickly where the budget runs out of steam.
Mm,
But
yes, yeah.
yes, like I have a feeling. I mean, we're gonna find out pretty soon more about that. But I mean,
Cool.
the house is totally livable and that kind of stuff.
Mhm,
But whether it needs a new well or a new septic
mhm.
system
Oh wow. Okay. Mhm,
remains to be seen. It's probably workable for a while. But
mhm,
there also needs to be a winery site. There's another
mhm,
building on the site that would be okay in a temporary
mhm,
way, but not in any sort of long-term way. And so, yeah,
mhm,
then it's like, right, building is a big one.
mhm, mhm,
And also, I'd like to, yeah, and that actually building something is probably going to be an early priority as well, whether it's a winery type situation or whether it's places for people to stay besides the house, so that it's much more easy to accommodate visitors who come from far away, because almost everywhere is far away from this place. So thinking about that
mhm.
is another,
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah.
finding
And I
some.
mean, this is the kind of things. I mean, I was thinking about the labor and everything. But I guess about the woofing concept and stuff like that. Which is,
Right.
I mean, this was my. I was talking about Wilderland. I was a woofer there. This was my big
Yeah.
contact to this kind of stuff. So I am very grateful I've done that back then. And
Oh, that's great.
um, there's all these ways of getting people on the land, and I mean, you said you wanted to show people also, so maybe this educational part of it could be something you can do through woofing and stuff like that,
Yeah.
um just to get started, really. I mean, that's a major project, and lots to do, and there's
Yeah.
lots of people that support these kind of things, thankfully. So yeah.
Yeah,
um
that's a really good point.
mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, and I guess my final question, maybe it's final, unless you have anything else to that we might go on, but
Uh-huh.
I mean, in looking through this, any other suggestions that you have, like are there areas that you see an opportunity that I missed, or anything like that? Just any play,
Mm.
like was there a part of it that inspired you in a way that I had, that I didn't even consider.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's also a nice question. Okay. So I mean, I think you're on the right path there. I mean, for me, like the next steps is to kind of look ahead. You've got your draft. You got your what you want to do. You got your concept. And just maybe talk to. I mean, this biodiversity aspect is very big in your plans and in your goal. And I think it's always um I'm not sure about your skills of how to detect a certain plant species or animal species, a bird or insect species. Um, unfortunately, there's always the chance that we just, by not knowing, that we can, um, damage an ecosystem or do something that
Yeah.
a certain species doesn't want. And I
Right.
think it would be a viable idea to talk to conservationists or people that might know these kind of lands and these kind of pastures and all that kind of stuff, to kind of just tell them, this is my plan. I don't want to, I don't want to plow the soil anything. Uh, uh, you want to graze it. Is this in? But you also want to have the vines there. Do you think this is fitting to the ecosystem? I mean, just kind of get an input on that. I don't know what
Yeah.
the outcome would be, but I think as this is such an integral part of your goals, I think it would make sense to check these things out. Um, you know, and the
Yeah.
same with the water aspect. I mean, water is great stuff, and we all need it. And but water also works in mysterious ways, and I kind of I know enough about water flow systems to know that I'm quite limited in how this works,
Yeah.
and like it's very to make this more clear for everybody. Um, the bedrock and your
Yeah.
soil and everything is very important um, in terms of how the pond will affect the water cycle on your farm. And
Right.
it might make sense to talk to a specialist about these things to um, under, better understand if this is actually creating the outcomes and is actually a viable idea that you want to do with the pond's feeding system going up and down, pumping water back and all that. Um,
Yeah.
because these things are easily said and done in theory, but in practice, I know enough about this kind of stuff that it's not that easy. I'm not saying it's impossible, but there's just sometimes limitations to certain soils, or it means that you need to have a different pond system put in place. And of course, these things get really expensive really quickly. I think that's something to
Yeah.
really look into before really saying or get yourself also fixed to the idea, I really want to pond in that spot. Because unfortunately, these things are just very expensive to implement. I also don't know about the legal stuff in the US, but in Germany, it's basically a thing, a bit of a nightmare to dig a pond somewhere. You need authorities to say yes, this is okay. You can't
Yeah.
just dig a pond somewhere. Um,
Yeah, I'm okay in
I
this
have,
land, but that actually is
yeah.
really good to
Okay,
bring up
cool.
about all of
Mm,
these design elements is like, yeah,
mm,
you could be quickly shut down by local
mm.
uh,
Yeah.
zoning and regulations. It's the
Mm,
absolutely like the first, like I think it's important to point that out that, yeah, I left
yeah.
that out of like the design analysis part that
Mm,
I'm actually really fortunate. So I forget to mention that, but yeah,
mm.
this land is, I mean, fortunate in some ways that this land is, sort of no regulations.
Okay,
Um,
yes.
but, but yeah, most places you would run
Mm,
up into you would run into some kind of
mm,
regulation, some kind of
mm,
restrictions and permitting necessary, that kind of stuff. So really
mm.
important to look into that.
Yep, that's definitely it. And other than that, I mean, it's you basically, I mean, you're going to start basing your life at a new place, and then the whole aspect of networking, get people to know about the project. I mean, this is so long term, and connecting and being open to people being interested in the project and working with you.
Mm,
Even before you've ever made your first wine is also a perspective to have.
yeah.
I mean, um, I think last time we also talked about the what's it called? The big Disney movie, The Little Farm, Biggest Little Farm.
Right.
Um, I mean, they already had something to work with on the land, even though it was, struggling as we have seen in the movie.
Right.
Um, but you know, um, I think all this kind of brand building, storytelling is something you can start now,
Yeah.
basically. Even and um, yeah, and then really just think about how with all the ideals that you have, um, um, you know, of this being basically a form of research site almost. Um,
Yeah.
the research also for me is always just makes sense if you talk and teach about these things is exactly do that and invite people to help them work there. That's the best form of teaching, or one of the best forms of teaching people, especially young people. So I don't think or I think that would be a really good part of that, just to get in people, like woofers or whatever system you want to do this in. And have courses. You have to graft your own apple trees, maybe. Well, get somebody in to show people and do it with 10 people. It's more fun, and you're teaching people, and you get more done in one day. So I like
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So these are
Yeah.
like ideas how I think that would fit to your values. Yeah. And other than that, I mean, I think you're on a good path, and I love how precisely you can talk about what you want to do there and why, and you can summon it. Yeah, I think the idea is very clear. That's what I'm trying to say. Mm,
Well, fantastic. I appreciate you taking the time to
mhm.
talk about all this. It's
Of course, yeah.
really obviously my passion.
It's
And
also mine. Sunday evening, and nothing else to do than talking
right.
with you about forever. So, in the sense of talking about my work. So, no, it's great.
Uh,
I'm really, I'm quite excited about this. Quite excited to see, and I want to visit one day. I'm sure it's going to be marvelous.
yeah, yeah, and likewise, I'm very excited to see how your projects turn out. I mean,
Mm.
I want more and more people to do these kind of things so we can all learn together.
Mhm.
It's just yeah, there's so much that's forgotten that would be great
Mhm.
to figure out,
Yeah,
refigure out.
to refigure out this. Yeah, fun.
Thank you, Nicholas. I
Cool.
appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me on again.
My pleasure. Well, there you go. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you found that helpful. As I mentioned, I will be linking to my permaculture design project on the beyondorganicwine.com episode webpage for this episode. And I just want to say, I thought many people in the course did a much more beautiful job with their design project. So I want to warn you that you may not find my design project to be extra special pretty, because I was much more focused on the ideas rather than the design aspect. So, keep that in mind. Be kind. But I think you will find that it is helpful and gives you a great look at the structure of a design analysis through this permaculture lens. I also want to say a big thank you to Nicholas again for engaging in this conversation, interviewing me, so to speak. And I want to give a big thanks to Piscinus Ranch for sponsoring this episode. I hope to see you on March 28th and 29th. Don't forget to register at piscinusranch.com or piscinuslearning.org. That's PAICINES. And a big thanks to Oregon State University permaculture program and the professors, the educators there that are doing such a great job with this curriculum.